Hi everyone, and so today I've been asked to share a few thoughts with you about the power of prayer. And I'm guessing that some of you would be expecting me to come up with some big stories of incredible answers to some really big asks. And I do have a couple actually. I can remember years back, a friend of mine had a link with a church in Canada, and they had bought some land and constructed a new building on it. And then some guy came along and said actually he owned the land and it wasn't theirs at all. And there was this huge legal dispute. This guy had some ancient papers. This was all before records were computerized. And he claimed that he owned all the land down to as far as the nearby river. And he was quite difficult. He wouldn't budge. He wouldn't cooperate. The church tried to reason with him and offer him some kind of financial compensation, but he was saying no. And they'd spent all this money on their building. And so all they could do really was to pray and to fast. And so that's what they did. They just kept praying. They kept fasting. But how could God possibly answer this one? Well, in the end, after much fasting, there was a huge storm. And do you know what? The river changed course and the church wound up being on the other side of the river. So this guy's whole argument that he owned all the land as far as the river, well, that meant he didn't own the land where the church was. Well, you know God can move mountains, so it seems that he can move rivers as well. And I've also got a few stories from our personal lives, actually, less dramatic maybe, but actually way more important to us. Do you know that when Kay and I first moved from London to Northumberland, Kay's parents said they would never ever come and visit us. They said it was too far. They felt that we were walking out on them. We, of course, were very hurt and upset. We prayed about it. We wanted reconciliation with Kay's parents. And then one day, Kay had a very specific word of knowledge. It was Christmas, about this time of year. And it was like God said to Kay, very directly, if you buy them as a Christmas present, a stay over Christmas in a service department in a beautiful heritage building that we'd spotted in Morpeth, then if you give them that as their Christmas present, they'll come. And Kay shared that with me, and I immediately said, actually, I've got all these points for free first-class train travel, because I was travelling up and down a lot in those days between Northumberland and London, and I've got enough points I could give them first-class return train tickets for both of them, and we could make that their Christmas present. And so that's what we did, and they were just overwhelmed and delighted. And it turned out a lot of the issues were they thought it was too far to drive, but they'd never considered coming by train. They didn't fancy staying with us in the very tiny 2-3 bedroom house we were living in at the time, but actually staying in this service department down the road was an answer to a lot of their concerns. And so they came not just once, but actually several times after that. God really had answered a prayer. And as is often his way, we got a little bonus answer thrown in too, because the proprietor of that accommodation in Morpeth actually offered Kay a job. And that was her first job here in Northumberland. It was a great provision for us. And this lady and her husband actually became quite good friends of ours over the years. And Anna wound up working for another hotel they owned in Aberdeen, which was where she was at university. So it just couldn't have worked out more perfectly. God really does answer prayer. But if I'm honest, there's also dozens of things I've prayed for, and in some cases I'm still praying for, where I've not seen the breakthrough or the answer I want. And it's very easy for Christian leaders to be selective in their stories and only share the good bits, the happy ending ones. Well, that's understandable perhaps. We want to motivate people, we want to encourage you. but we can be at risk of presenting a one-sided understanding of prayer. Guilty of only appreciating the power of prayer when it's our own little shopping lists of requests which are being ticked off. You know, one day some of Jesus's disciples tried to deal with a demon, and they told the demon to leave the person that it was harming, but the demon wouldn't. But the disciples had noticed Jesus was able to do this without any problem, so they went to him and they asked, why couldn't we do what you do? Why couldn't we deliver this man from the demon? And you can see Jesus' answer in both Mark chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 21. It's slightly different in both chapters, but essentially he says, "O you of little faith, this kind only comes out with prayer and fasting." Now, what is Jesus saying here? Is he saying that actually this was some kind of super demon, category 1 demon? Well, anyone can deal with that. Just speak to it nicely and it will hop off. Category 2 demon, nope, if you've not fasted for 2 days, then it has some kind of authority to ignore you. And category 3 demon, well, if you're unlucky enough to come across one of those, it has the right to completely ignore you unless you fasted for at least a week. Is that what you think Jesus meant? Maybe. But another way of looking at it would be to say that actually he was referring to the lack of faith deep within us and saying that's what won't budge unless we spend time in prayer and fasting. This inability to understand deep in our hearts that we are God's ambassadors. We are his representatives. We carry his authority. Now, there is something about prayer that brings us to the point where we kind of actually give up on what we're asking for, and we realize that God is under no obligation to us, and we appreciate that he's already given us more than we could ever want or imagine. There's something about prayer that aligns us to God's agenda, that catches us up in him, that makes us realize that it's okay if we don't get what we want, that he's in control and that he's for us, he's for us. He really wants the best for us. Now, I've got this book at home. Sadly, right at the moment, it's packed up in a box, and it's about a man who was a male model, actually, and his life was full of drugs and sex. That's what he lived for, and that's all he knew. And in a strange way, I need to say this carefully, but I felt some kind of connection with this guy because he had some friends that died in the Marchioness disaster, which was an incident when a party boat full of models like him and high living people sunk in the River Thames in London. And it so happens that my team at work had booked a party boat from the same company for the very next evening. So that event is clearly etched on my mind because me and my boss had a furious day the next day, phoning around, are we going to carry on? Are we going to cancel? Is it safe? All that sort of thing. So I'm very, very familiar with that event. But this guy, he writes that one day he picked up a book and read it, and it changed his life. You see, the book that he picked up and read was the Bible. And as a result of reading the Bible, he actually gave up his job and he gave up his lifestyle. He and his girlfriend, they were living together at the time, but they actually decided, because she read the Bible as well, and they decided to stop living together and to not have sex again until they got married. And so they moved out, and a little bit later they did get married. And this chap, he got a new job actually caring for children and babies that had been born with AIDS because their mums had AIDS whilst they were pregnant. Actually, quite a lot of those mums in the same sort of drugs lifestyle as he had been in. And he describes an incident holding a 2-year-old girl in his arms and dancing with her, and realising that the pop song that was playing whilst he danced around the room holding this little, very sick baby girl was actually the same song that he had paraded to so often on the catwalk. And he wrote simply in his story that the biggest mountains that God moves when we pray are the mountains inside our own lives. And that last bit has been my experience too. The thinking of things from my point of view, the need to fulfill my agenda or to enhance my role or reputation in some way. Prayer changes things, but most of all, it changes me. And I trust as we come to the end of our week of prayer that that will be your experience too. Thank you so much for listening.